Welcome back to the Landlordship Podcast. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about frequent questions when it comes to rent collection and delinquency. We're going to talk about some of the common headaches that you often hear about or maybe even see in court, and we'll figure out how we can maybe avoid these situations from getting completely out of control. Strap in, guys. This is going to be a good episode. For many people in this industry, one of the more unnerving things to do is have a situation where rent is uncollected, whether it be the first time a tenant has screwed up or the third time the tenant has screwed up. For many investors out there, it's just an uncomfortable situation that makes them queasy and they try to get out of it any way possible other than actually having a confrontation, mostly because they don't feel equipped for the confrontation. So through this episode, we're going to get you guys equipped as self-managing investors for how to tackle those sticky situations where rent goes uncollected. Now, even if you use a property manager, I still want you to keep tuned into this episode because there are some elements that are going to be useful for you to know. So that if you have a situation where your property manager is trying to collect rent and they're failing, maybe you can offer some suggestions on how to do it. Remember, a property management and landlord relationship is supposed to be collaborative. So this would be one of the ways that you can actually collaborate with your property manager and help solve a problem that mutually affects you both. So for starters, here's a good question. I have a tenant who is in eviction right now. I have confirmed that they have recently applied for rental assistance. However, I have no idea how long this will take, and I don't know if they're actually approved. Can I still go through the eviction in the court system? Well, whether or not you can still go through the eviction in the court system, that is going to be up to not only your state, but also the individual county as well, and how the judges view those sorts of situations. However, before it gets to that point, there are certain things that we can do to gather information for figuring out, okay, should we go through with this eviction or not? When I have a tenant that tells me that they've applied for assistance, one thing I stress to them is that just because they've applied for assistance, it doesn't mean that I'm going to just slurk back into the hedges like Homer Simpson. No, I'm still going to be here. I'm still going to be asking for my rent. But now I'm going to be asking for updates. So when you have a tenant that is applying for assistance, I want you to be getting weekly updates from them. Weekly updates. And those weekly updates should really only be a touching base. If they get information before that, they should be telling you right away when they get that information. So the weekly touchbacks are just to be sure that they know that you are still watching for that rental assistance and that they still need to follow through on it and get it situated. Another thing that you can do is ask for contact information for where they're applying for assistance. Go directly to the source. Go to the case manager or whatever the title may be for the person that's helping them apply for and receive that assistance. Go directly to the horse's mouth. See how far along they are in the application. Are there things that the tenant needs to turn in yet that they haven't? How long is it going to be to cut a check if they've been approved? Have that open communication with the case manager. Now, the reason you're doing this isn't necessarily so that you're doing the tenant's job for them, but it's more so that if you end up going in front of the judge on this eviction, you can say, well, yes, Your Honor, Lisa did apply for assistance. However, when I called them just last week, Thursday, Lisa hadn't submitted any of the supporting documentation yet. And she had received 2 phone calls from the agency before trying to get this documentation from her. So that's the reason why you want to have direct line of communication with the case manager. You're gathering your evidence in case it needs to be presented to the judge, because you show up there, the tenant says, oh, Your Honor, I'm applying for assistance. Most judges are going to give them a little bit of a leeway. They're going to basically call an extension for the case. And they're going to say, okay, we're going to give you a 3-week extension, 4-week extension. But if you have this evidence that says, hey, Your Honor, Lisa's application has been sitting there for 4 weeks, and the agency has tried multiple times to get these supporting docs from her, that's going to likely cause the judge to put the brakes on it and say, yeah, you know what? I'm going to give you 72 hours to get that paperwork into the agency, or else we're going to be back here next week, Monday, and I'm going to sign off on the eviction. So that's why you do some of this background work with the case manager yourself. Now, as far as how long you should wait for assistance before applying for an eviction, let's say that you have a tenant that you haven't actually filed an eviction yet. Maybe you haven't even issued a 5-day yet, but you know they're trying to get assistance. What do you do in this situation? Well, I always look at it this way. If it's a full month rent that they are lacking, I am sending them a 5-day notice. Now, it's not because I intend to follow through and file that eviction as soon as I can with my 5-day notice, which, little sidebar here, 5-day notice is the legal notice we need to give in Wisconsin before we file an eviction. So substitute whatever notice you have in your state in that sentence. But if it's a full month's rent, I am issuing a 5-day notice. I might not necessarily be intending to file on it on day 7, but I want it out there. I want them to know I'm serious. I want them to know that I'm taking these steps so that if they don't actually follow through with getting the assistance, I'm still going to file this. So I'm going to issue them that 5-day. I'm going to tell them, keep me up to date on your progress. I tell them, send me weekly updates, and I give them a specific day that I expect their updates to be in my inbox. I also say, if you hear anything in the meantime, be sure to tell me right away. Some people will tell you right away, some people won't. They might tell you right away if it's something that they need from you. Like maybe the agency came back and said, oh, well, this lease is really out of date. It's 10 years old. We need you guys to sign a new updated one. They're likely going to call you right away to tell you that because they need something from you. That's why you have these set check-in days, because then they're just going to update you on those days. And it's probably going to be the things that they were asked to do that you're not involved in, or they're just going to tell you, yeah, I don't have an update, but I did call and I left a message for the caseworker today. That's what the purpose of the check-ins are. So I'm issuing the 5-day. I'm telling them that I want to hear from them weekly. I give them a specific day I want to hear. And sometimes they're literally just telling me, yeah, there's no difference. And I even called the assistance program and there's no difference. The other thing I will do is I will be sure to let them know that there is a timeline for this. Now, there's not a timeline in the sense of I need my payment within 2 weeks, because if they are applying for assistance, that's likely going to be completely unrealistic. Unless, of course, they're using their church, which is on a very smaller level. Any sort of citywide or countywide assistance program is going to take longer than just a week or two to get the check written out. But what I do say is, I need to know your documents have been submitted within 5 days from now. I need you to give me a contact for the agency, the person that you are working with, within 14 days. I'm giving them these deadlines and these steps for information that I need so that I can also check up on it as I need. This also further exemplifies to them how serious I am about getting these assistance programs in place and getting this money back. So now let's say that they said they've applied, they've been approved, but they're waiting for the agency to cut the check. If you have confirmation from the agency themselves that, yeah, they're all approved, but the check hasn't been cut yet, I would say you don't file that eviction, because everything's all set. It's all ready to go. At this point, it's out of the tenant's control. It's nothing that they have done that is holding up the process. It's strictly the agency that is sort of taking a stroll down the park lane while we're trying to get this money collected. So the best thing you can do at that point is keep on top of the program and calling the program. I wouldn't do it every day because then you're going to make somebody angry. And I think it kind of goes along the lines of, you could make your server angry enough at Chili's that they actually like spit in your food before they bring it out to you. So I recommend following up maybe once a week with the agency if you're waiting for the check to be cut. I wouldn't do it much more than that. You want to exert some sort of control and patience with this organization because chances are you'll probably be working with them again down the road and maybe even the same exact caseworker. And again, we talk about building relationships. If they have a positive light of you, then if something's kind of a little hokey or a little weird, they might give you a heads up or they might give you a little extra time to get something done. So definitely don't burn that bridge with the agency when you're going through this process. Now, what happens if they've applied for assistance and you can't get a hold of anybody at the agency? You don't have any confirmation that they've actually applied. It's been 4 weeks. What do? Well, if it were me, I honestly would roll the dice and probably file the eviction and go forward with the eviction. This would be assuming the tenant has no means of paying anything themselves in small portions. And it's also assuming that maybe I have reason to question what the tenant is telling me or the tenant's gone silent. Obviously, if the tenant ever goes silent in this process, you just pass go, collect your money, you go all the way. Like you go straight to the courthouse. But otherwise, it's kind of like a guessing game as far as what you should do at this point. If they're in constant communication with you and you're getting them to make good faith payments in the interim, then maybe you don't necessarily file. Good faith payments are a really good strategy, which we're going to talk about in another question here. But that's another tool that's in your toolbox in this situation, where even if they're asking for assistance, you can ask for good faith payments. So that's probably the way that I would handle this particular situation. Next question. I have a long-standing tenant who's never previously had any issues with paying. However, the past 4 months, their rent payments have become extremely erratic. And now they've told me that the next 2 months are going to be late if they're even paid on time. I'm not sure what to do with this situation. Do I just see what happens, or do I try and address it? Well, you certainly don't necessarily drop it and see what happens. You don't just sit back on a beach chair and go, oh, well, I'll see what happens over the next 2 months. The tenant's being proactive with you, which means that they likely want to try and do something that will keep you on their good side. They're not necessarily trying to skirt themselves completely out of the balance, or they're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes. So in this instance, you have a couple different things that you can do. First off, anyone that's in that situation, it's a great thing to have in your toolbox if you have a list of organizations that you know provide assistance. So here in Wisconsin, we have organizations called Community Action. They are great resources for getting emergency rental assistance for tenants. Maybe there's something similar in your state. Salvation Army across the nation, they do not only security deposit assistance, but they also do rental assistance in times of hardship. So those are two that I'm pretty sure will exist in your state. Another thing I like to include in there is just the other likely sources of assistance. So depending on what company the person works for, if they work for a very large company like perhaps Target or like Amazon, I don't know, I'm just throwing companies out here, there might be some sort of emergency financial assistance available through the program if they meet certain, or through their employer if they meet certain criteria. Another place that people can find assistance commonly is their church. Usually they have to be a member of the church or know somebody in the church, but churches are a good place for some emergency rental assistance. Some churches have a specific fund set up if they're a really big church that is specifically meant for rent or mortgage assistance for its members, or maybe they just have a financial hardship kiddie fund for members as well. That's likely going to be a resource for your tenant, assuming they have some sort of connection to a church. Now, you don't have to find the specific churches, by the way. It's totally great just to put in there churches, large employers, as just a list of other places that they can potentially find rental assistance. So you're telling this tenant who has told you they're not going to be able to pay rent this month and the next month. So you're giving them these places that they can look for rental assistance. That's the first thing you're doing. And you're telling them, hey, look into these resources. Please apply to one or more of these places within a week and provide me an update next week, Thursday. Give them a specific day, again, that they're giving you this update. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to ask them for a good faith payment. A good faith payment should be something that is due very quickly. It's due like in the next 72 to 96 hours. And it's something that is not insignificant, but it's also not going to break their bank. And that's the important part here. You know they have trouble, so you don't want to ask for a $300 good faith payment. Because chances are, unless of course their rent is like $2,500, that $300 is likely a lot of money to them. So instead, your good faith payment is going to look something like $100, $150, something like that. Ask them to make a good faith payment by the end of the week. And be sure to tell them that if they don't make that good faith payment and you don't provide an update on rental assistance, you may be forced to move forward to the next step. Don't be afraid to say that. Set your parameters, set your rules, and stick to them, and make sure they know what the consequences are if they don't. So after the good faith payment and sending that assistance money, you're going to kind of sit back for a couple days. You're going to wait and see if that good faith payment comes in. If it does, great, wonderful. That's a huge step in the right direction. That's a very good sign from them. Then you're going to see how it goes with the rental assistance for a couple days. Usually about a week after that good faith payment is made, I reach back out and I say, hey, I know you're applying for rental assistance right now. I'm so happy that you gave me that good faith payment. This will tide us over for 3 weeks. During that time frame, let's get you applied for assistance. Let's see what kind of resources are out there for you. Let's get the ball rolling on these sorts of things. Hopefully we can find you some sort of assistance. If we don't, we might have to come back to the table and figure out a payment plan. At 3-week mark, if I don't know if they're getting assistance or not, I'm creating a payment plan with them. And I'm asking for another good faith payment. A good faith payment, again, it's not going to break the bank. This one's not going to break the bank either. You're looking for 150, 100, whatever seems appropriate and nominal in regards to the full amount of rent for the month. But you want to keep these good faith payments going as you're trying to figure out what's going on. Let's say you can't get rental assistance for the full amount or you can't get any at all. Then what you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, I need a payment plan in place within 72 hours. It needs to be signed by both of us, and the first payment must be paid. So whenever I set up a rent assistance payment program, I always be sure the first payment is due within 72 hours. And I always say that they have to make that payment. If they miss that payment or any payment, I have the right to file an eviction or to issue a 5-day if I need to issue a new one at that point. That's how I would handle a situation where a tenant tells me that they're going to be late for 2 months of rent. Next question. I have a tenant who hasn't paid rent for 2 months. They're still at the property. I've made attempts to work with them to collect the balance. Am I in the right that I just went to the property and changed the locks when they were gone? No, no. I don't know what state in the United States of America would allow you to do that anymore. Like, I know we all just saw that on Disney's movie about the Giannis family and how they had their landlord in Greece like change their locks while they were out. Great, fantastic, but guess what? I will probably sit here very confidently in my seat and tell you there is not one state in the 50 states that will allow you to do that in the modern world. So, no, it was not okay that you went over to the property and changed the locks while they were out. That's a huge no-no. No, 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 no. You have to file and follow the legal process in your state. You just have to. I'm sorry. Like, if you want to be creative with this, don't change the locks. It's not really creative. That's just getting yourself in more trouble because, believe me, you've just opened yourself up to a huge lawsuit from the tenant because you don't have the legal right to do that and you've locked them out of their home. But if you want to go creative, do the cash for keys. Say, hey, you haven't paid for 2 months. I want you out of here. If I gave you $300 and I sat here in my car and watched you get out, would you give me the keys in 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it is? I don't know, 24 hours, whatever you want to give them. But if you feel like you just don't want to be bothered with the court system, the last thing on earth you should be doing is just changing the locks while they're going to the gas station to get bread and milk. No, do cash for keys if you want to avoid the legal system. But if you don't want to do that, then guess what? I'm sorry, you're stuck filing the legal system, because if you don't and you just change the locks, you're going to find yourself on the flip side of it in court. And believe me, there is not a judge in this country that is likely going to side with you on that. In fact, most every judge on this planet in this country is going to ream you for doing it. They're going to give you, as the British will call it, a proper dressing down in court in front of your tenant and possibly investor colleagues about what you did wrong, and they're going to give you a huge no-no finger. That's going to be really, really embarrassing for you and really, really expensive, because you might have to pay hotel costs for the tenant. You might have to pay damages to the tenant. You'll have to pay court costs if they hired an attorney. Just don't do it. Not a good, viable solution at all. Never, ever change the locks on a tenant that is currently living there because they didn't pay rent. Next question. I have a tenant who has been a really good tenant for years. However, they recently hit some hard times when their husband left. They have 2 kids in the unit. They aren't necessarily looking to move, but yet they've had a hard time making ends meet while the husband's been gone. Would it be okay if I had them do odd chores around the property in exchange for rent credit? Has anyone had good experience with this? What's the bad experiences with this? Okay, so in regards to the situation, I say yes, you can do that. I don't necessarily recommend it if it's not necessarily going to save you consistent money that you would be spending. So here's an example of that. Maybe you have a tenant who's a painter, but it wasn't really on your radar to have the hallways painted in the property that they're living in. Giving them a rent credit for painting the hallways that you weren't planning on painting, I just don't think it's like that tit for tat that you need in that situation. So I wouldn't really do that. But let's say you have somebody clean the hallways every week. Maybe what you can do is have the tenant clean the hallways once a week. And once you know they're consistently doing it, then yes, you can go ahead and cancel your cleaner for the time being. Say, hey, I've got somebody who's hard on times. They want to clean the hallways once a week for the next 6 months, just to give them a little bit extra income or pay down their rent a little bit. I'm going to hire you back in 6 months to do the hallways again. Or if it's a duplex, something like that, maybe you have them do the lawn mowing because that takes that bill off your plate. Or maybe it saves you time if you're self-managing and self-mowing as well. I wouldn't do it with snow removal. I think I've said this a couple times. Snow removal is something I strongly believe should be outsourced to professionals for liability reasons. Because remember that any tenant who does it for rent is in essence and looked upon from the court as an employee of yours, which means if they fudge up and they forget to salt or they forget to shovel entirely and another tenant slips and falls, you can be sued and the tenant is your employee in that situation, so you can't really get off the hook with that. So it's totally fine to have them clean hallways, have them mow the lawn, maybe pick up the trash in the yard on a weekly basis. If there's something that you know they can competently do that will save you money on a consistent basis, then sure, it's fine to do this exchange of items for rent credit. Just be sure it's something that you actually budgeted to have an expense for, meaning you were planning on doing something, or it is a recurring expense that's going to save you money. Now, whether or not and how much you give them, that's totally up to you. You could say, hey, I pay the lawn mowing company $89 once a week to come out. So you know what? I'm going to give you a credit of $89 a week. Or maybe you just say, I'm going to give you a credit of, let's say, $200 a month for mowing the lawn. However you want to work it out, just make sure it's fair. If you know how much it costs for you to have that service done by a third party, which you likely do, then your compensation to the tenant and rent credit should be very, very similar, if not the exact same. But I do recommend this. I think it's good. If you have tenants that you can trust and you know they're going to do the work well. Now, if you have somebody who says, yeah, I can totally go ahead and replace that, water heater downstairs you've been meaning to replace, but they're not a plumber, I wouldn't be doing it. If they're a general contractor, sure, but no. And anything like that, I would also be going to check the work myself to be sure that it was done properly before I give them the rent credit for it. So anything you do give them to do, make sure it's within their purview. Just because they say they're handy doesn't mean that they can replace a water heater or that they can, let's say, run a new bathtub line for you. Make sure it's something that they actually have knowledge about and is in their purview before you agree to let them do it. Because otherwise you can end up costing yourself a lot more money and a lot more headaches than it would have been just to ask them to set up a payment plan for money rather than doing goods or services for you in exchange for rent credit. All right, guys, that was a lot packed into this episode. It's already like 28 minutes long, so we're going to cap it here. I hope you guys got some good information about dealing with these rather sticky situations. There's a lot of tools in your toolbox when it comes to collecting rent with tenants that are behind. So recapping that, whether it's going to be having a list of assistance programs available that you can send out to the tenants, making sure you get good faith payments while they're applying for assistance, making sure you get good solid payment plans with deadlines, making sure your communication setup has deadlines, maybe possibly exchanging services in regards to rent as long as they are services that you currently pay for or were planning on paying for in the near future. Those are great things to have in your toolbox when it comes to trying to help a tenant out and also help yourself out by either increasing your rent and getting your rents paid back, or by decreasing your expenses because the rent isn't coming in. I hope you guys have a great week. I will see you next time. Bye.